If they fall, if they fall. He couldn't finish the sentence. For nearly 2 years, Dominic Calderon had learned to love his sons from a distance. Through glass, through screens, through medical charts and blinking monitors. Alistair and Bennett Calderon, once noisy toddlers, now sat most of their days in silence. Their small wheelchairs had become permanent fixtures in the playroom. Toys lay scattered across the floor, untouched. Teddy bears leaned against walls they no longer reached for. Dominic told himself this was protection, doctors, surveillance, schedules, protocol. What he never allowed back into the house was faith. When the twins' condition worsened, their mother, Seraphine Calderon, turned to prayer. Dominic turned to control. The difference between them became a fault line that split the home in two. When Dominic mocked the prayers as false comfort, Seraphine made a choice no mother ever wants to make. She left the house, but she did not leave her children. Every morning in a quiet church in Evanston, she knelt alone and prayed the same prayer. God, go where I cannot go. Back in Winnetka, Dominic replaced warmth with cameras. He watched every shift change, every breath, every movement. And yet, for all his monitoring, the house remained emotionally still. Until the day Malia Thompson arrived. She was young, poor, wearing an orange uniform that made her stand out against the pale walls of the Calderon mansion. She didn't speak much. She didn't quote medicine. She didn't challenge the rules. But she noticed the details no one else did. The way the twins flinched when strangers reached for them. The way they stared at the floor for hours. The way they stopped crying because crying no longer brought comfort. And somewhere between her first shift and her second, something quiet shifted in the room. Dominic didn't notice that shift at first. He only noticed it later, through a camera, on a day that would undo everything he thought he controlled. By the time Dominic truly looked at his sons again, they were already standing. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The Calderon estate, once echoing with giggles and tiny footfalls, now rang hollow. After the accident, silence became the loudest sound in the house. 2 wheelchairs sat like shadows of the life once lived, their presence constant, their wheels unmoving. Seraphine had not planned for a life like this. No mother does. But when the twins lost the use of their legs, her soul collapsed inward. Her arms, once strong and sure, now trembled from holding prayers instead of children. She lit candles in the attic. She knelt beside their untouched beds. She whispered over their toys, but Dominic noticed. One morning, as sunlight tried to warm the cold dining room, he drew a hard line across the table with his voice. No more prayers, he said without blinking. No more superstition. This house runs on medicine, therapy, monitors, facts. Seraphine looked up slowly, lips parted in disbelief. Prayer isn't superstition, she said. It's hope. It's a distraction, he snapped. And we can't afford distractions. He installed the first camera that afternoon. At first, they fought loudly. Then, they fought like strangers through silence, through closed doors, through looks that no longer searched for understanding. Seraphine stopped folding his shirts. Dominic stopped asking how she slept. They drifted like boats, tied to separate docks. And one day, she packed a single suitcase. There was no custody battle, no illness, no tragic accident to claim her life. She left by choice. Not because she stopped loving the boys, but because she believed in something stronger than cameras. She relocated to Evanston. A small, sunlit apartment, sparse, quiet, her sanctuary. Each morning, she placed her palms on the floor and prayed by name twice, once for each child. She asked for strength, not for herself, but for the tiny legs that could no longer run. She whispered life into futures that doctors said were frozen in time. Meanwhile, back in Winnetka, the house transformed. The nursery lost its softness. Plush bears gathered dust. The lullaby mobile never turned again. Warmth was replaced with routine. Every room buzzed under Dominic's new normal. Nurses rotated on a tight schedule. Lights turned off and on with precision, and cameras blinked silently from every corner like unblinking eyes of judgment. He called it order. But in the playroom, once alive with laughter and blocks and gentle chaos, the soul of the house withered. Toys were neatly shelved, not played with. Pillows sat plump, not wrestled on. And the twins, now mostly quiet, were watched but rarely heard. It was a home without faith. The only time the house remembered Seraphine was in the way the twins sometimes reached upward, even though no one was there to catch them. A reflex. Or maybe something deeper. And as she unpacked her suitcase in Evanston, Seraphine whispered something into the still air, her voice barely audible beneath the hum of her own sorrow. If I can't reach them, God will. Some mothers pray from inside the house. Others pray from exile. If you believe distance doesn't cancel love, staying with this story is already an act of empathy. The playroom once held the heartbeat of the Calderon estate. Now, it barely exhaled. Alistair and Bennett sat motionless in their wheelchairs, positioned just inches apart, yet each boy felt light years away from the other and from the world. Neither spoke, neither cried. Their silence was not peaceful. It was practiced. Plastic blocks lay frozen mid-build on the soft carpet, as if waiting for hands that no longer reached. A red rubber ball had been kicked beneath a shelf, half deflated, untouched. The same teddy bears that once joined in make-believe adventures now rested awkwardly on the floor, arms sprawled wide like soldiers fallen in battle. Everything in the room was in its place, but nothing was alive. The nurses came in shifts. They wore soft shoes and spoke in clinical tones. They noted vitals, adjusted cushions, administered medications. They smiled out of obligation, but never with their eyes. No one sang. No one told stories. No one kneeled to look the twins in the eye. Efficiency had replaced affection. From his office down the hall, Dominic watched everything through the glowing CCTV screens. His eyes scanned each camera with the precision of a surgeon, but never the warmth of a father. He never entered the playroom. Not once. He monitored eating schedules, sleep cycles, physical therapy reports. Data filled his days. Charts covered his desk. He studied the twins' conditions like a science project, but never once whispered a bedtime word or brushed a hand through their hair. He believed attention was enough. He didn't notice that presence without presence was its own kind of abandonment. Over time, the boys stopped responding to the nurses' voices. They no longer smiled when toys were placed on their laps. They no longer turned toward movement or sound. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. They simply stopped trying. Alistair often sat with his gaze locked on the ceiling, his fingers limp against the wheelchair's armrest. Bennett, smaller by a few minutes but quieter by a lifetime, stared downward for hours so long. One camera recorded him unblinking. The staff assumed the boys were adjusting. The truth was, they were surrendering. Even their dreams, if they had any, seemed to unfold behind glass. A world where reaching brought no embrace, where smiling found no echo, where their mother's voice had been replaced by beeping machines and distant nurses. And yet, the playroom was never truly empty. Not entirely. Some afternoons, the sunlight would sneak in, casting golden beams across the toys. Dust would rise gently into the air like tiny prayers, and once or twice, for the briefest moment, a flicker of memory seemed to pass between the brothers' eyes, as if somewhere, beneath the surface, something still breathed. But Dominic didn't see that. He only saw two boys staying exactly where he had left them. If silence could scream, the playroom would be deafening, and if watching was the same as loving, they'd have never stopped reaching. If you're still here, it means you know what they needed wasn't treatment, it was touch. One camera captures Bennett staring at the floor for hours, without blinking. The staff door buzzed open at precisely 7:02 a.m. She stepped inside quietly, unnoticed by most, carrying nothing but a small canvas bag and a presence that didn't match the rest of the house. Her orange uniform, crisp but gentle in color, stood out like a flame in the pale corridors of the Calderon estate. Her name tag read M. Thompson, but she didn't introduce herself to anyone. She moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but as if speed would break something fragile in the air. Her shoes made no sound on the tile. Her eyes scanned everything not for protocol, but for story. When she entered the playroom, she didn't speak. She didn't announce her arrival. She simply looked around. Blocks, frozen mid-play, teddy bears, unmoved, forgotten, 2 boys, still as photographs. Malia stepped in fully, and the door shut softly behind her. She knelt not beside a clipboard or a monitor, but beside a small yellow bear whose arm was twisted backward. She gently righted it and placed it upright between the boys' wheelchairs. No one else had touched the bear in weeks. She didn't give instructions. She didn't comment on posture. She didn't scan vitals. Instead, she sat, on the floor, legs crossed, level with their eyes. She tilted her head to one side and just waited. Then, after a long pause that felt sacred, she whispered, "Good morning." No one answered. But for the first time in weeks, both boys looked, not away, not through her, at her. Their heads didn't move, but their eyes found her face, studied it, uncertain. Malia smiled, not the polite stretch of lips worn by the nurses, but something smaller, warmer. A smile that didn't expect anything in return. She didn't fill the room with chatter. She let the silence breathe, and added only the softness of her tone to it. "My name is Malia," she said, "but you can call me anything. I'll still answer." The camera in the corner blinked red. Watching, from his home office, Dominic stared at the screen with narrowed eyes. He rewound the footage twice. Watched her sit. Watched her speak. Watched the boys look up. Too slow. Too quiet. Too gentle. He made a note in her file. Unstructured interaction. Reassess suitability. He had hired her to assist with transitions and light cleaning, not to speak like a mother, not to sit like a friend. But Malia didn't read his notes. She stayed exactly where she was. As the clock inched past noon, the other nurses filtered in and out with precise steps and cold efficiency. Malia remained on the floor, organizing nothing, correcting no one, simply placing small toys near small hands. And when she left, she didn't announce that either. She stood, gently squeezed the bear's paw, and whispered, "See you tomorrow." The boys didn't respond, but something lingered. That night, as the lights dimmed and the cameras hummed, one camera caught it. Alistair, who hadn't moved his head in weeks, turned toward the direction of her voice. Sometimes, healing doesn't start with medicine. Sometimes, it starts when someone chooses to sit low. If you're still reading, maybe you believe gentleness isn't weakness. It's rebellion. Tomorrow, Malia returns. And this time, the boys are waiting. The surveillance room glowed dimly, a grid of black and white CCTV feeds flickering across the wall. Dominic sat alone, shoulders hunched, coffee untouched beside him. His eyes traced every pixel of the playroom camera, as if vigilance could replace presence. It was a quiet afternoon. Routine. Predictable. Until it wasn't. On screen 4B, Malia knelt between the boys again, her orange uniform crinkling softly as she moved. Dominic leaned forward. She wasn't holding a chart. She wasn't adjusting machines. She was lifting their hands, gently. She removed the socks from Alistair's small, pale feet, then Bennett's. She placed a soft rug beneath them, brushed away toy blocks, and without a word, let their fingers explore the floor. Their bare palms met the textured weave of the rug. Their fingertips curled against the earth-toned threads. Malia said nothing. She just let them feel it, and then it happened. Alistair blinked. A slow, almost startled blink. Bennett's fingers twitched, then pressed into the fibers. Neither boy looked at Malia. They were entirely focused on what was beneath them. The moment didn't last long. Dominic was already on his feet. His shoes struck the hallway tiles like a warning. The playroom door slammed open hard enough to make the youngest nurse flinch. Malia didn't rise. She simply turned her head toward him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Malia glanced down at the boys. Alistair's hand was still resting on the rug. Bennett's fingers were still pressed flat. His lips parted slightly as if the texture had awakened something inside him. They needed to feel the ground, she said softly. Dominic stared at her. This is not therapy, he hissed. This is not protocol. You could have compromised their positioning, undone months of treatment. Malia didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She only said, they haven't touched the earth since the accident. Their world has been made of wheels and wires. Sometimes, healing starts with remembering what the ground feels like. Dominic's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. You're on your last warning, he snapped. If I see anything like this again, anything outside of the care plan, you're done. He didn't wait for a reply. The door slammed shut behind him. Silence returned to the playroom. Malia exhaled slowly and returned her attention to the boys. She pulled their socks back on gently, one by one, as if sealing a secret between them. She didn't mention the confrontation. She didn't name the tension, but something had shifted. That evening, long after the house quieted and the night nurse made her rounds, the cameras continued their silent watch. One feed flickered briefly, just enough to catch it. Bennett, the quieter twin, the one who always looked down, pulled one leg forward by himself. The movement was subtle, strained but undeniable. Dominic didn't see it. Not yet, but someone had awakened something. And it wasn't from a textbook. There are moments when rules feel safer than compassion. If you've ever chosen kindness when it wasn't allowed, staying with this story is already a reflection of your heart. That night, Bennett pulls one leg forward by himself. The church was empty except for her. Seraphine knelt near the back, hands folded tightly, the cold of the wooden pew pressing into her knees through worn denim. Her breath came in soft, uneven exhales, her lips moving with no sound. A candle flickered in front of her, its flame trembling like the hope she refused to let die. Please, she whispered, finally. Let them feel something again. Let them remember their legs, even one twitch, even 1 inch. I don't need a miracle, just motion. Across town, the Calderon estate sat still beneath a gray sky. Inside the playroom, Malia sat on the rug once again. The boys were beside her, socks off, tiny toes exposed to the cool carpet. She didn't push. She didn't command. She simply placed her hands gently on their knees. Try to lean into it, she said softly. Not to move, just to feel. That's where everything begins. She pressed a soft cushion beside Alistair's left foot. Just shift a little, she encouraged. Just enough to say, I'm still here. Back in Evanston, the church walls echoed with Seraphine's whispered petitions. I'm not asking to take their place, she murmured. But if pain could be transferred, I would carry it. I would drag every limb until they could run again. Her hands trembled in her lap. I can't reach them, she choked. But maybe you still can. And somewhere, far away but impossibly connected, 2 small bodies began to listen. Malia didn't see herself as an answer to anything. She was just a girl in orange who believed in floor time and gentle voices. But something in her matched the prayer happening miles away, an unseen current, moving through faith and fiber alike. Alistair grunted softly. Malia's eyes darted toward his shoulder. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a word. But it was effort. Real effort. That's it, she whispered. Bennett's fingers tensed, then relaxed again. His feet shifted ever so slightly against the carpet, brushing up a trail of forgotten dust. No miracle, no shouting, just trembling. And far from that quiet room, Dominic sat in the surveillance room, watching. He didn't touch the coffee. He didn't write a note. He didn't call for anyone. He just rewound the footage, played it back. Again and again. The boys hadn't walked, but they hadn't been still either. That night, as Seraphine lit another candle in the tiny kitchen of her Evanston apartment, she felt something shift in her chest. A peace, not loud, not full, just enough to exhale without breaking. She had no way of knowing what had happened. But across the city, in a room she once painted seafoam green, 2 boys, her boys, moved their feet on the same day for the first time in months. Faith doesn't always look like miracles. Sometimes it looks like trembling, like floor time, like not giving up when everything is silent. If you've ever believed in progress without proof, staying with this story is already an act of faith. For the first time in months, both twins shift their feet the same day. The surveillance room was unusually quiet. Dominic sat alone in the cold blue glow of the CCTV grid, his eyes fixed on one feed, camera 4B. The timestamp flickered in the corner. The image was live. The playroom. The twins were not in their wheelchairs. They were on the floor. Dominic leaned forward, jaw tightening, hand hovering over the rewind button but not pressing it. The boys, Alistair and Bennett, were wearing matching red outfits, the same ones Seraphine had bought months before the accident, still folded in the back of their closet until today. The chairs sat behind them now, abandoned, unused, overshadowed, and scattered all around. The boys were toys, bears, blocks, a soft rubber ball. None of it arranged neatly, none of it staged. The mess wasn't chaos, it was life, returned in fragile fragments. At the center of it all, Malia knelt in her orange uniform, her back to the camera. Her hands were extended, not grabbing, not guiding, just open, steady, calm, her head tilted slightly. And though the surveillance feed didn't carry audio, Dominic could read her lips from the monitor. "Come to me, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm right here." Neither boy spoke. Neither moved yet, but the stillness wasn't the stillness of before. It was charged, waiting, like a held breath across two cities. Dominic didn't realize he'd stopped blinking. Bennett shifted first, his hands trembling as he planted them to the floor, weight shifting slightly toward one knee. But he didn't lift his foot. Alistair stared at Malia, his mouth open just a bit, not enough to speak, but just enough to breathe her words in. The silence in the surveillance room was absolute. Dominic's finger tapped the desk once. Then again. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't in the care plan. There were no therapists present, no gate belts, no protective mats. Only a girl in orange, kneeling low, speaking to broken limbs like they were sacred. "Come to me, sweetheart. I'm right here." Dominic gritted his teeth. He should have stormed in, should have stopped it, but he didn't move, because on the screen, something was happening. Alistair's toes curled. The muscles in his leg, long thought dormant, clenched not from spasm, but in tension. His body swayed slightly, uncertainly, and then, slowly, he lifted his foot off the floor. Just an inch, maybe less, but it was off the floor. Dominic's hand fell away from the keyboard. On the screen, Malia didn't react with shock. She didn't cry out or rush forward. She simply extended her hands a little more, as if her very stillness had invited the impossible. The camera kept rolling, and Dominic, who had designed this room for control, not compassion, sat in silence. Outside, winter light filtered in through frost-covered windows. But in that room, something thawed. Not in the playroom. In him, some moments don't need miracles. They need someone who stays still long enough for movement to begin. If you've ever held out your hands for someone who is afraid to take the first step, staying with this story is already part of the healing. Alistair lifts his foot off the floor. The playroom felt different that morning. No alarms, no therapists, no protocols waiting to be followed. Just light, soft and golden, spilling across the carpet where two boys sat like seeds waiting to rise. Malia knelt again. Orange uniform slightly wrinkled, hands low to the ground, voice calm but full of something deeper than instruction. Before her, Alistair and Bennett leaned forward on trembling palms. No one was rushing them. No one was lifting or correcting. They weren't being treated, they were being trusted. And in that trust, something ancient stirred. Alistair moved first. With a soft grunt, he pushed against the carpet, lifting his body an inch, then another. His legs shook beneath him, muscles screaming with unfamiliar weight. He faltered, but he didn't stop. Beside him, Bennett's hands trembled like leaves in a storm. His arms locked at the elbows, and with one sudden jolt, his knees came beneath him. Both boys were upright, not standing but rising. Their legs spasmed violently, the kind of unsteady, staggering force that would have once triggered concern. But Malia didn't panic. She didn't interfere. She only edged forward, slowly, her palms still low, her body still soft, ready to receive, not rescue. Dominic watched from the surveillance room. The monitors glowed like prophecy. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He just stared at the screen where his children, his silent, still children, moved like they were remembering who they were before the world told them they couldn't be. Bennett tipped sideways. His foot missed the mark. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might fall, but Alistair shifted beside him, shoulder against shoulder, just enough to steady them both. Together, they moved again. One step, then another. Malia didn't reach out. She whispered something too soft for the camera's mic. But the words didn't matter. The invitation had already been extended. They walked to her, not far, not cleanly, but they came, their bodies buckled under the weight of their own hope. Their knees knocked, their steps were uneven, but their wheelchairs remained untouched behind them. Dominic was still frozen. He didn't reach for the comm. He didn't call anyone in. He didn't rewind the footage. He watched. The room changed without a word. Everything he had built, every monitor, every chart, every tightly wound schedule had created walls. Walls of precision. Walls of control. Walls he believed would keep the chaos of heartbreak from returning. But today, none of that mattered. He built walls of control. But Grace entered through the floor, and Grace didn't knock. It simply rose, on two trembling sets of legs, toward one woman who knew better than to get in the way of a miracle. Malia sat back on her heels as the twins collapsed into her open arms. They didn't speak. Neither did she. They just breathed together. For the first time in over a year, someone wasn't watching the boys survive. Someone was witnessing them live. Dominic wiped at his eye quickly as if dust had caused it. As if emotion could be reasoned away. But he didn't leave the room. He stayed, and he watched it again. From the beginning. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin with answers, it begins with being seen. If you've ever held space for someone else's breakthrough, staying with this story means you already know the sacredness of quiet victories. The wheelchairs remained untouched behind them. The church in Evanston was empty again. Except for her. Seraphine sat near the back, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. A candle flickered 3 pews ahead, casting shadows on the marble floor. She had not come to ask this time. She had come to listen, and then, without warning, the pew creaked beside her. She turned. Dominic. He didn't speak. He didn't sit. He only held something out toward her, a phone. Screen aglow, shaking slightly in his hand. On it, a video. Alistair. Then Bennett. Both boys wobbling forward. Malia's hands low and steady. The red outfits. The untouched wheelchairs in the background. Her sons. Moving. Breathing. Alive. Seraphine didn't make a sound. She simply covered her mouth and wept. The video ended. Dominic lowered the phone. She did not ask why he had come, or why he had waited. He did not ask her to return. There was no reunion scene. No dramatic promises. Just 2 people who had loved the same children and failed in different ways, sharing the weight of a quiet miracle. She looked at him once, long enough to see he wasn't the same man who had banned prayer from their home. And then he left. No explanation. No demand. No control. Back in Winnetka, the Calderon estate was quieter than usual. The playroom door was open. Light spilled across the carpet. The bears were still on the floor. The blocks remained out of place, but something else had changed. Dominic stood in the corner with a screwdriver in hand. His jacket was still on, his sleeves rolled up. And slowly, methodically, he unscrewed the CCTV camera from the ceiling. He didn't tell anyone why. He just did it, because watching had never been the same as seeing. Inside the room, Malia knelt again. Her orange uniform was stained at the knees. She looked tired, but not defeated. The twins sat near her, legs outstretched, still unsteady, still unsure. The wheelchairs had not been thrown away. Some days, they were still needed. But they were no longer the only option. And Malia? She was still a maid. She did not become a headline. She was not invited to speak on morning shows or write a book. Her name did not trend. She was not a miracle worker. She was a woman who chose to kneel, and stayed long enough for 2 boys to believe someone still would. In Evanston, Seraphine lit another candle. In Winnetka, The boys took 3 steps before collapsing into giggles neither had made in months. And Dominic, he finally walked into the room. No clipboard, no watch, no data, just a father, sitting on the floor, watching the life he tried to control start growing on its own. Some victories arrive without applause and without certainty. If you've ever waited for healing that came quietly, staying with stories like this is already a form of faith. He watched them for months through machines. But their first real steps taught him how to see.